I feel like I'm on top of the world.
Hey, Jack, I feel like I'm flying.
You want to take it from the story just so we all know where we are? All right.
You've probably watched Titanic a dozen times, but after what you're about to watch, you'll never see the movie the same way again. Titanic is definitely one of the most carefully crafted films in Hollywood history. Every shot, every costume, and every line was designed to feel authentic. But despite the obsession with perfection, there are multiple mistakes that made it past editing, and some of them are so unbelievable that when you see them, you'll understand why the producers try to hide them so badly. The Emergency Axe 21. The Emergency Axe glass mishap. There's a small moment during one of the most intense scenes in Titanic that most people miss on first watch. Rose is running through the flooding corridors, trying to survive. At one point, she stops at a fire emergency box that contains an axe behind a pane of glass. Rose smashes the glass and grabs the axe to help free Jack. Everything looks good until it doesn't, because if you pay attention to the next few shots, something weird happens. A large part of the glass she just broke is suddenly back, fully intact, sitting there like nothing ever touched it. There's no sound of more glass breaking and no shot of it getting replaced. How did the glass just magically appear unbroken between cuts? This scene is definitely one of those blink and you miss it bloopers, but once you catch it, it's impossible to ignore. And shortly after this particular scene, another shocking blooper that'll make you question the logic behind the movie happens. Rose and the Rubber Axe 20. Rose and the Rubber Axe. During one of the most suspenseful moments in the film, Jack is handcuffed to a pipe in a rapidly flooding room. And after Rose grabs the axe, she proceeds to try and break the chain holding him. It's meant to be tense and emotional, but if you look closely, the scene includes a very obvious editing fail. First, Rose isn't positioned quite right. The way she's angled makes it clear that if this were real, she probably would have missed, and even worse, she might have gotten Jack's arm instead of the cuff. But that's not the only shocking part of this scene. As she swings the axe down, the head of the axe bends on impact and visibly flops. It turns out the axe was made of rubber, a standard safety measure for scenes like this. But it wasn't supposed to be that obvious on screen. The way it bends completely kills the illusion for a second. Instead of a life-saving tool, it looks like a toy prop that doesn't belong in such a dramatic moment, and it definitely makes this scene feel a bit clumsy once you notice it. 19. The water breaking through the window. This one's easy to miss because it's buried in one of the most powerful and chaotic moments into the water breaking through the window film. During the ship's flooding scenes, water breaks through windows in the ship. It's fast, dramatic, and clearly meant to show how intense things are getting. But if you rewatch it carefully, something strange happens. Those exact same 4 windows seem to get smashed by the water in 2 completely different ways. In one shot, the water crashes through the first window, the second, and the third before the last window. However, in another shot, the water enters through the first, second, and fourth before finally passing through the third. It's the same scene and same location, but the angles and the way the glass shatters don't match. And that's because the scene was actually filmed multiple times by the director, and rather than pick one version, the editors ended up using shots from different takes. Visually, the difference is subtle, but once you catch it, the change in water flow is obvious. Of course, it doesn't affect the story, but it does reveal just how many times these scenes had to be res hot for maximum drama. In the rush to piece together the best action, the continuity slipped and the water told on them. 18. Cameraman reflected in the glass door. Cameraman reflected in the glass door. This particular editing fail is probably one of the hardest to find, but once you see it, you can't unsee it. There's a scene where Jack steps into the upper class area of the ship for the first time. It's a big moment. He's about to enter Rose's world, and the camera shifts to show things from Jack's point of view. He's walking through elegant doors, admiring the polished interiors, and we, the audience, are supposed to feel like we're seeing it through his eyes. But if you slow it down and look closely at the glass door, there's something that shouldn't be there. It's a clear reflection of the cameraman appearing in the glass. It's not just a blur, but an actual silhouette with camera equipment. It happens quickly, but it's definitely there. This kind of blooper is common in movies that involve shiny surfaces, especially when they use practical sets instead of computer-generated imagery. But in a movie as polished and expensive as Titanic, it's surprising that this slipped through. It's meant to be Jack's point of view, but for a brief moment, it turns into a behind-the-scenes sneak peek. Disappearing Suspenders 17. The disappearing suspenders, this one's easy to miss, unless you're really paying attention. During the intense scene, where Rose is trying to break the handcuff off Jack, there's a wardrobe continuity error that's easy to miss. In one shot, Jack clearly has his suspenders on over his shirt. But the moment Rose actually swings the axe and breaks the cuff, the suspenders are suddenly gone. Why the sudden fashion change in the middle of a life-or-death situation? Well, the answer is simple. They made use of stunt doubles. The shot where the cuff breaks wasn't done with Leonardo DiCaprio himself. It was a stunt performer standing in for him. And apparently, someone forgot to put the suspenders back on. So when the camera cuts to the next shot, Jack's suspenders magically reappear like they were never missing. This small detail completely breaks the flow of the scene, but will definitely crack you up when you realize it. The Moving Beauty Mole 16. The Moving Beauty Mole. Rose might have been flawless in every frame, but her mole, known to some as a beauty mark, not so much. If you pay attention to her face throughout the film, especially in close-up shots, you'll notice something strange. Her signature mole that adds a little extra glamour to her beauty shifts sides in different scenes. In some shots, it's on her right cheek. In others, it somehow ends up on the left. This is most likely the result of flipped film, a common trick used during editing to make the action flow better or match angles. But flipping the image means anything on one side of a person's face ends up on the other. It's not something the audience is supposed to notice, but once you catch it, it becomes oddly distracting. In a movie where everything was crafted to look perfect, a moving beauty mark is definitely a very clumsy editing fail that editors do not want you to catch. Visible Wires 15. Visible wires during stunt fall. As the Titanic begins to break apart, passengers are thrown in every direction. It's total chaos, with people sliding down the deck, falling off railings, and hitting the icy water below. But in one of those dramatic moments, if you pause at just the right frame, you'll spot something that breaks the illusion. One of the actors being pulled downward by the force of the breaking ship is clearly attached to visible wires. The wires were meant to control the fall and keep the stunt safe, which makes sense. But they weren't supposed to be visible in the final cut. Somehow, in the rush of the scene and the fast editing, a few frames slipped through where the harness and wire are clearly noticeable against the dark backdrop. It's easy to miss, especially during your first watch, but this blooper definitely stands out, especially when you suddenly realize that the actor didn't get pulled by the ship, but by a rigging system off-screen. But apart from physical bloopers and editing fails, there are also theoretical fails in Titanic that are just as shocking as the physical ones. Some of these include storylines, comments, theories, and events that just don't add up because they're so historically inaccurate, and this next blooper is one of those. 14. Rose's Sigmund Freud reference. Rose is sharp, witty, and well-read. That's part of what made her so different from the world she came from. But one of her clever remarks actually trips up when it comes to historical accuracy. There's a clever little moment in the first-class dining room where Rose throws some serious shade while making a reference to Sigmund Freud. While dining with her uptight mother, her arrogant fiancé, Cal, and a few of the ship's elites, the conversation turns to the Titanic's name. Ismay proudly says it was chosen to represent size and strength. That's when Rose cuts in and asks him if he knows of Sigmund Freud, adding that his ideas about the male preoccupation with size might be of particular interest to him. It's a smart jab and a funny scene. Some people laugh, but Rose's mother is horrified. Ismay, completely missing the insult, asks if this Dr. Freud is a passenger on board. But here's the problem. That witty one-liner shouldn't have existed, at least not in 1912. Sigmund Freud hadn't yet published his theories connecting masculinity and size at that time, and those ideas only came out after the Titanic sank. So while Rose's comment was brilliant and way ahead of its time, it was also historically inaccurate. So while her iconic line adds a modern intellectual flair to Rose's character, it's a clear case of the screenwriters inserting the cultural knowledge from a different time into a 1912 world. Inaccurate red lipstick 13. Rose's era-inaccurate red lipstick. Throughout the film, Rose stands out not just for her personality, but for her look, especially that classic red lipstick. It fits her bold, rebellious energy perfectly. But historically, that makeup choice would have raised more than a few eyebrows. In 1912, red lipstick wasn't seen as elegant or fashionable for upper-class women. In fact, makeup was often associated with actresses, dancers, and women from lower social classes. For someone like Rose, who was wealthy, well-bred, and constantly under scrutiny, wearing bold lipstick in public would have been considered inappropriate, even scandalous. High society women in that era leaned toward natural looks, often using light powders or nothing at all. Red lipstick didn't become widely accepted or fashionable until the 1920s, when flapper culture made it bold and trendy. So Rose's lipstick wasn't just a bold fashion statement. It was also a little modern flair added by the filmmakers to give her character more visual edge and appeal. It works beautifully on screen, but if you know your history, it's a subtle detail that doesn't quite match the time period. Visual effects errors 12. Visual effects errors in the ship shots. James Cameron poured everything into making Titanic feel real. And for the most part, he nailed it. But a few visual effects moments didn't quite hold up, especially when you look back with modern eyes. Let's start with the wide shots of the ship. These impressive moments often showed the Titanic sailing in all its glory, filled with passengers moving about on deck. But most people don't realize that the wide shots of the ship itself weren't of a full-size vessel, but of a detailed scale model. And so, to make it look populated, tiny human figures were added using early computer-generated imagery editing techniques. And that's where it gets a bit awkward, because if you focus on the people walking around the deck in some of these shots, they move in a robotic, repetitive way, with stiff body motion and unnatural pacing. Some don't even appear to cast proper shadows, and this only creates a moment where the realism dips and the ship starts to look like a video game cutscene rather than a historic epic. Then there's the scene where people jump off the ship while it's sinking toward the end. These falls were partly done with special effects and stunt doubles, but several of the edited jumpers look strangely weightless or unnatural. Their limbs don't move realistically, and they fall with a kind of floaty motion, almost like dolls being tossed in the air. These scenes just prove that for a movie with a massive budget and top-tier talent, Titanic also had its limits in the 90s. The ambition was huge, and the execution was close, but not always perfect. Door opens by a ghost 11. Door opens by a ghost. In the unforgettable scene where Jack draws Rose like one of his French girls, there's a moment that's supposed to feel private and tense. Everyone remembers the scene. Rose walks into the room, robe on, and heart pounding. But what most people don't catch is what happens right before she enters. Take a closer look. As Rose walks in, it seems like she's entering dramatically on her own. But if you slow it down just a bit, you'll see something odd. She never actually opens the door herself. Instead, there's a visible hand, just for a second, pulling the door open from the inside. This hand is most likely a crew member who was supposed to stay off camera. A little behind-the-scenes blooper that slipped into one of the film's most iconic scenes. Once you notice it, the moment feels kind of funny, like Rose is being gently pushed into a scene where she's supposed to walk majestically into. It just reminds you that, at the end of the day, this was a set with people behind the camera trying to make every scene perfect. And even perfection sometimes needs a little off-camera help. Titanic Design Disparity 10. The Titanic Design Disparity. James Cameron's version of the Titanic is beautifully detailed. The grand staircase, the long hallways, and the massive decks all feel like a museum come to life.